Welcome back, quilters. We're now ready to make our block 6 for the sampler quilt. And this block is called Chameleon, and it's by, let's see, Deborah C. Volbrack. And there's her name and a place where you can find her on the web. And quite an interesting block. Looks a little more complicated than it really is. And so we're going to take this block step by step and get it made so that we can all put it in our quilt. I want to say a little something about this block before I start. It requires a template. And for those of you that have the book that has the CD, it's this template down here on the bottom. It says A and AR. And it also shows you how to lay it on the straight of grain. And we're going to talk about that in a little bit. One of the things I found with using this template is that it made the block too small for what I wanted. All of the blocks I've made so far finish at 12.5 inches. This one, if you use the templates that are on the CD, it finishes a little less than that. And I can show you the discrepancy between the sizes of the blocks. Here is block 5 that we just completed. And here is block 6 using the template that came with the book. And you can see the differences in sizes. See how much smaller that block is using the templates that came with it than this one, than my block 5. So I changed the size of the template, and I am going to give you the size that I used. Now, if you have the book and you want to use the template that's with the book, absolutely go ahead and do that. I just needed to change it a little bit because I wanted a block the same size of all the blocks that I'm making for my quilt. We're going to start with graph paper, of course, and for this particular template you can use a variety of graph papers for it. This is a graph paper with 1/8 of an inch squares. This one has 1/4 of an inch squares. Any of these will work. This has 1/2 of an inch squares, and of course we get to the 1-inch squares. Any of these will work, and you're just going to start with a 6-inch rectangle, a rectangle that is 6 inches by 3 inches. And I'm going to stop a little bit here and just share with you a website where you can find free graph paper. Just go to this website and just print the graph paper that you want, so that you don't always feel compelled to go out and buy graph paper. We use a lot of graph paper in quilting. I like to use the Quilter's graph pad because those sheets are all 12.5 inches. And I tend to make large blocks in an effort to make large quilts. So I like that pad. But for something like this, just to make a template, any graph paper will do as long as I can get the sizes on it that I want. For instance, if I needed to make something that was 5 and 7/8 times 5 and 3/8, then I might want to use the graph paper that has 1/8 of an inch squares. But if I want something that's going to measure to 3 1/4 times 6 3/4, I might want to use the graph paper that has 1/4 of an inch squares. And you can see how this goes. When your measurements are whole numbers, then of course any of the graph papers will work and work fine. And I hope you're able to see this and to get this address down. I've gone to this website several times, and I've been able to just download. Well, you don't even have to download it. You click on the paper you want, and it will come up, and you can just print it. Just print it directly from the website. and print as many copies of it as you need. So please feel free to go to this website to get your graph paper, and don't feel like you have to run out to the store to buy graph paper. Okay, and I'll hold this up again later on. So, Chameleon needs rectangles. And when I show you the construction sheet, you will see that it's made of rectangles. So let's get started in making the template. On your graph paper, you need to draw a rectangle that is 3 inches by 6 inches. Once again, the measurements for your rectangle are 3 inches by 6 inches. And you also need to draw the diagonal. The next thing you're going to do is cut the rectangle out and cut it on the diagonal, and you will get 2 halves of the rectangle. And these are my 2 halves. And one is mislabeled. This should be A, R. You'll notice that I turned one on the back because when you put this rectangle together in the pattern, you need the flip of one of your triangles. And I didn't trust myself to cut the triangle on the correct side and then the next one flip the template over and cut it that way and then flip again. I'm not so sure that I would have remembered to do all of that flipping. So instead of doing that, I've made a template for the flip of this. And you might want to do the same thing. So I'm really using 2 separate templates. After I cut that out, I did as before. I glued it to something stable. This is part of an old folder, and you can see I've used part of it earlier, but here it is. You glue this down, and notice the red line. The red line is where you're going to cut this out. That indicates that the 1/4 of an inch seam allowance has been added to all sides. And you need to cut it so that you are including the seam allowance. I don't have a red line over here because this was attached 1/4 of an inch from the edge. So I've got the seam allowance on this side. Don't have to cut that side. Now where I have to cut, I have this red line to indicate to me where to cut so that I make sure I include the seam allowance. And when you have completed this process, this is what you will have. Here are your templates. Maybe it works better if I turn them right side up. Here we go. You can see that they are the flip of each other. I can see that too. But at my age and with my memory, I may not have remembered to flip that template each time that I needed to. And I would have ended up with a lot of pieces that would have been the same. Waste of fabric, waste of time. So if you're like me, make a flip of the template. Then you've got it and you don't have to worry about cutting the wrong thing. So get your templates made and we will be ready to cut our fabric. I want to take a moment to tell you that I appreciate your compliments and comments about these videos. And I am getting some great suggestions as well. One person shared with me that in order to make templates, she knows of a person who collects cereal boxes and other little boxes as they come into her house so that she can use the cardboard in those boxes to help make the template stiff. Another viewer asked me if I could show the directions for assembling the block that were on the page. These pages don't have much information on assembly, But what is there, I promise I will share with you so that it may help when I give an explanation. When you see what the author had in mind, it may help with putting this together. So now let's look at chameleon. Chameleon is a 12.5 inch block. Just like many 12.5 inch blocks, it can be divided into 4 parts. Here is a unit, that's unit 1. Here is a unit, down here is the 3rd unit, and here is the 4th unit. Each unit is made up of 2 rectangles. And here we go again, unit 1. 1, 2 rectangles. 1, 2 rectangles. 1, 2 rectangles. 1, 2 rectangles. Each of the rectangles has 2 colors in it. And so look again. Here we have the light pink and the dark pink. Light pink and black. Black, light pink. Dark pink, I'm sorry. Dark pink and light pink. And the bottom is just the opposite. Light pink, dark pink, black, black, dark pink, light pink. Keep that in mind. Essentially, since our templates are halves of a rectangle, to sew this block together, we are sewing those rectangles back together. And you can see that. Here we've taken both halves of the rectangle and we've sewn them together. And here's another rectangle with both halves sewn together. And so it goes all the way through the construction. And so what you need to see now are the cutting instructions so that you will know how many of each color triangles to cut. And here is our block, and here are our cutting instructions. These are, they tell you it's the here we go. They tell us by template what to cut. And it may say so many of A, so many of AR. I need to get it up there. Oh, I need to turn it so that it's the correct way. But I just want you to see what you're cutting. And you're looking at the colors that are in the block as the author of the block, the creator of the block, decided to show it. Remember, you can change those colors. If you look at what's there and then look again at what's here, you have the option to change those colors. In fact, I chose to make a 2-color block. And I haven't quite looked at how it's going to turn out, but I think it will be fine. Since I am using mostly African fabrics, I really didn't want to put 2 African fabrics together in this block because I didn't think they would sparkle the way I need them to. So I used a couple of my neutral fabrics, and then I used 1 African fabric so that the African fabric could shine. And that's what you will see in a minute when I show you the pieces that I have cut. So once again, your cutting instructions. And let me get it on there so you can see it. There we go. Let's look at my cutting here on the table. Remember I said we're going to be making rectangles or sewing rectangles together. And according to our construction information, here is the very first rectangle. And you can see the two pieces that have to be sewn together to make this rectangle. Here is the next rectangle. And when I have sewn this to this and these two together, I will have also created the first whole unit in the block. And remember, because we've got a 12-inch block, we've got this block divided into 4 equal units. Each unit has 2 rectangles. You can see them here, and they are sewn together down here. Notice that each rectangle has 2 colors in it. There are 2 colors in each of the rectangles in the construction picture, and I have 2 colors in each of my rectangles. I'm only using 2 colors to make the block because I want this African fabric to stand out, but each rectangle has 2 colors, 2 colors, 2 colors, 2 colors, 2 colors, 2 colors. Keep that in mind as you begin to sew your rectangles together. And so what I'm going to do first is take these 2 pieces to the sewing machine, as well as these 2 pieces. I'm going to get these 2 rectangles sewn and then sew them together and come back and show you what I've done, including the pressing of the seam allowances. Before I go any further, I want to talk about how to sew these pieces together. I didn't say much about that this time, and when you sew them, you want to make sure that they are just as you see here, just flat across the top. You see how that's just flat across? You see the little dog ear sticking up, but that's just flat across the top. That's what you want to get. And the one way to assure that you get that when you stitch them is to have, let's see if I can show you because I've pressed this. When you get ready to stitch, you want, let's get the threads out of the way. You want a little peak of that triangle sticking up 1/4 of an inch above the little piece of fabric. You see how that white triangle sticks up 1/4 of an inch above the red? That is how you want it to look when you start your seam. If not, they don't come out flat across the top. And I don't want you sewing this and taking it a loose, sewing this and taking it a loose, because you're going to stretch it. You're working with quite a few bias edges here. So we have to sew it the correct way the first time so that we don't have to take it a loose and handle it so much. So once again, when you lay these 2 pieces right sides together, you want that little triangle sticking up. And notice that your seam starts right at the base of that triangle. Actually, there are 2 little triangles here that you can see, one in red and one in white. And notice that the seam starts right in the middle of those 2 triangles. And so even if you start on the other end, same thing. This time you see the red triangle sticking up. Now, I haven't done a good job of clipping my threads. Don't want any distractions because I want you to see this. See the red triangle sticking up 1/4 of an inch? See how the seam starts right there? That's what you have to do. It's just harder to see it here because my thread and the beige fabric I'm using are just about the same color. But it's easier for you to see here. And this is how you're going to stitch this. I can't stress that enough. you have to have that point sticking up 1/4 of an inch above the fabric to which you're sewing it. It has to happen. And when that happens, and you open it up and you're getting ready to press it, you see that you have a straight edge across. And what you see here is just that little piece sticking out in the back. But that's what you want, is a straight edge across. And the way to get it is to make sure that little point is doing what it should be doing. Now, let me call your attention to what I just did here. I have this triangle sewn together, this rectangle sewn together, this rectangle sewn together. Now I need to sew the two rectangles together right here in this seam. And I will have completed the first unit of my big 12.5-inch block. And here we go. I've got this rectangle to sew and this rectangle to sew. And when I do, I'll have the first unit completed in the block. I finished sewing this. So this was unit number 2. You can see it's made of 2 rectangles. Each rectangle has 2 colors. In my case, of the African fabric and the beige. And this one has the African fabric out here in the beige. And now I can lay them down, and I'm going to sew those together eventually. I don't think I'll do it right now, but this is the top of my block, and I just need to sew that center seam right there. But I think I'll wait. I want to sew this unit together and sew this unit together. Then I can put this with that, put this with that, and sew that center seam, that vertical center seam. So I'm going to now sew these rectangles and these rectangles and complete sewing the bottom of my block, and then show that to you before I put the 4 units together. Here's the bottom part of the block. Now all 4 units of the block have been sewn together, and you can see exactly how they should be. Notice that the white cuts through the pink at an angle, and that's exactly what's happening here in this block. The author used 1, 2, 3 fabrics, and I am using only 2 fabrics, but we are doing the same thing. You have an option to use 1, 2, 3, or 4, however many fabrics you want to use. Just keep in mind that you are making a 12.5-inch block and that you have 4 units in that block. And now after you construct each unit, it's time to sew them together. So I think I'm going to sew this bottom unit to this top unit, this bottom unit to this top unit, and then I'm going to have a seam down the middle vertically. And I'll tell you the reason I decided that. I want to make sure that I match what's happening here. And I can do that with a smaller seam than if I had one long horizontal seam. So I want to make sure that I get these matching. See how pretty that point is out there? And so I want to work on that point, keep it, and it's just easier to do it in a shorter seam. So once I get this seam and this seam sewn, then I'm ready for that last long vertical seam. Now I have the block all sewn together. I think it turned out pretty well. I really like the fact that the white cuts through the pink, that pretty pink, gold is in there, and some black. But that's our African fabric, and the African fabric really gets to shine. And I did pay close attention to my points out here, because now I know I have space for the 1/4 of an inch seam allowance that I need when I get ready to sew the blocks together in the quilt. And the same thing happens up here. You see that little place right in there, and that's where the 1/4 of an inch seam allowance will be used when the blocks are sewn together. This is one of those blocks that has a lot of moving parts, as I like to say. And it does have a lot of bias edges. And so it's a block you want to take your time with. It's a block that you want to sew a seam one time so that you're not repeatedly taking the seams apart, because the fabric will stretch and you will have to start all over again. We're moving right along now through our series of blocks. Already at block 6. Pretty soon I'll have block 7 up. And we're almost halfway there, because the goal is to reach the 15 blocks that I wanted to make. Continue to send me comments about the videos and give me suggestions. And as I can incorporate your suggestions, I certainly will. And one last thing, I said I would make 2 of each block. Well, I did. And so here is the second block made from the chameleon pattern. And it too only uses 2 fabrics. One reason that I chose just 2 fabrics, the design is so big. And if I have a big design with big busy fabric, I don't think they will work very well together. So here's a time when I can limit the number of fabrics, limit what's going on by using something very basic and neutral around the big bold fabric that is here. And so both of these blocks then do that for me. They take the busyness out because there are fabrics in here to calm everything down, so that the fabric that is a print gets a chance to truly shine, and you get to see that fabric and to appreciate what's going on there. And you've seen this one through several of my blocks. It's a really great piece of fabric for fussy cutting, and you have seen that in several of the blocks that I've made, and you will continue to see that in other blocks that are coming up. So I want to leave you with the cutting instructions like I normally do, and I'm also going to put the website up for finding graph paper. Happy sewing, and thank you for joining me. Here's the website for the graph paper. And here are your cutting instructions again.